Chapter 2. And Willie is part Indian. When Willie and his father reached the house, the rest of the family were already in the dining room. "Come on, you're late," called 21-year-old Sally. "And we've got company," Maud said. "Here's Charlie McClellan come to stay overnight," said Mrs. Rogers. "Hi, Charlie," said Willie. "Asio," said Charlie. "Awaniski." "What'd you say?" said Willie, puzzled. Mr. Rogers laughed. "Asio," he said. "That's Indian talk," Willie cried. "And what have you done to your hair, Charlie?" Charlie was about Willie's age and size, but his hair was long and caught in a braid down the back of his head, Indian fashion. "I must tell you all about it," said Mrs. Rogers. "The McClellans stopped by here on their way up to Coffeyville in Kansas to get the mail. They told me Charlie wants to be just like a full-blood Cherokee." "Why, Charlie, you're only 1/4 Cherokee, same as we are," Maud said. "Is that right, Papa? Am I a quarter Cherokee?" asked Willie. He'd seen lots of Indians in the territory, but he didn't know he was related to them. "Certainly, son," said Mr. Rogers. "All you children are 1/4 Cherokee. Our families all came from Georgia with the Cherokee Nation when the Oklahoma Indian Territory was established." "Ha, you," said Charlie. "That's true. And Indians live outdoors and hunt and fish, and that's what I like." Willie scratched his head. He cocked his head on one side and thought a minute. "Papa says I'm part mule," he said slowly. "And now you say I'm part Cherokee. I hope there's enough of me left to be an American cowboy." Everyone laughed. "Oh, Willie," said Sally, "you're so funny. Why, we're all descended from the very first Americans. The Indians were here long before the white people came from Europe." "Why don't we live in wigwams then?" asked Willie. Everyone laughed again, except Willie. "What's so funny?" he thought. "If we're Indians, I don't see why we don't live in wigwams." "Oh, Willie," said Maud, "how do you think of the things you say?" "Come on now, Clem and you children, the food will get cold," said Mrs. Rogers. "I'll see you," said Willie in imitation of Charlie. When he said it, he looked and sounded so much like Charlie that everyone smiled. "That isn't the right word, Willie," said Charlie. "You just said hello." At that, everyone broke into laughter. "Well, I like to say it anyway," said Willie. "I'll see you." Willie and Charlie were playing in the front yard under the tall spruce trees. Charlie had put on Indian leggings and moccasins, and he wasn't wearing any shirt at all. His body was deeply tanned from the hot summer sun. Charlie picked up a thick dead branch. He started giving war whoops. He danced around Willie and waved the branch. "What do you call that?" Willie asked. "A tossie," said Charlie, waving the branch. "War club." "Well, don't you go on the warpath for me." "Why don't you get some leggings and moccasins too?" asked Charlie. "I've decided to be a cowboy," Willie said. "Why, I'll bet cowboys have the most interesting life there is." Just then, Mr. Rogers drove past in the buggy. "Come on, boys. I'll take you down to Dan's." Willie and Charlie climbed in. It was about 3 miles to Dan's house, over the hill and down by the cattle pens. As they drew near the pens, they could see several men at work, putting up new rails and posts. Off in the distance, a large herd of cattle was moving slowly. Several cowboys were riding along, keeping the animals together as they ate the rich grass. Willie watched them, wishing he were on horseback too. "When can I help with the roundup, Papa?" he asked eagerly. "Next year?" Mr. Rogers laughed good-naturedly. "Willie, you're just a child." "Well, I can ride a horse," Willie said. He wished Papa wouldn't call him a child. He was going to be a cowboy soon. In a few minutes, they came to Dan's house. Dan and his wife, Aunt Babe, came out to greet them. "Hello, boys," said Aunt Babe. "The children will be glad to see you." "Mac, Charlotte," called Dan. The 2 Negro children were Willie's favorite playmates. They came running out of the house. Willie started to tell them about Charlie's clothes. "Now, don't let these kids bother you too much," Mr. Rogers said to Aunt Babe. "Willie and my tomboy Charlotte sure can make a lot of noise," she answered, "but I don't mind." "I'll be back later." Mr. Rogers turned the buggy and drove away toward the cattle pens. "Uncle Dan," said Willie, "would you do me a favor? Will you show me how to lasso?" He'd been wanting to ask for a long time. Dan was the best roper on the ranch. If only Dan would show him, maybe he could get to be a cowboy soon. Why, sure, Willie, said Dan. He got his rope from the cabin. Charlie and Mac and Charlotte came running over. Charlie's going to show me how Indians paint their faces, Charlotte exclaimed. Well, you looky here first, said Dan. I'm going to show Willie how to rope. He took a long coil of rope and laid it on the ground. Then he made a knot in the end of the rope. Now, that's called a Honda, he said. Willie watched him closely. Then Dan pulled a loop through the knot to make a noose. He shook it out carefully so that it was a large loop. You got to keep your loop free, he said. Then you twirl it a little and take aim for your mark. He swung the loop around close to the ground. Suddenly he threw the loop toward a post about 20 feet away. The loop fell neatly over the post. Look at that, shouted Willie. He was fascinated by the easy way Dan's quick fingers handled the rope. Why don't you whirl it around your head before you throw, he asked. The other cowboys do. Well, that's one way to take aim, Dan said. But looky here, that's just a waste of time. I can make a catch better if I keep my rope close to my side. He brought back the rope, took out the knot, and dropped it on the ground. Now I want you children to try. Willie, you go first. Willie seized the rope eagerly, but when he tried to make the knot, he couldn't remember just how it went. He peppered Dan with questions. Then the others tried, but they couldn't do so well as Willie. Come on, show us again, Dan, begged Willie. He was determined to get the hang of it. Dan worked with them for a long time. He showed each one how to make a loop and aim at the post. Soon Mac, Charlotte, and Charlie grew tired of roping. They went off to play by themselves, but Willie was still eager to learn. How's that, Dan? He asked, as he made a quick loop and began to whirl it in imitation of the cowboys. He knew it wasn't a very good imitation. The rope was so heavy for him. Why, Willie, that's right good, said Dan encouragingly. Now try throwing it. Willie threw toward the post, but his loop fell short and got all twisted. Dan took up the rope, threw it quickly toward the post. Smack! The loop fell over the post and cracked against the wood. Willie watched carefully just how Dan did it. I know what I'll do, said Dan. I'll fix you a lighter rope for your own. It'll be easier to handle and you can take it to practice with. Soon Willie was busy making a noose in a slender rope Dan had found. Carefully he shook out his loop and flipped it toward the post. Neatly it fell over the post. There, he shouted. Did you see that? Willie pulled hard on his rope, tightened the noose around the post. Whoa, boy, he called in imitation of a cowboy who has just roped a steer. Whoa, boy, hold him. Then he threw his hat in the air and shouted. Looky here now, Willie, said Dan. You practice that throw and maybe I'll show you some tricks. But you got to know how to handle a rope first. Willie loosened his rope from the post. He coiled it up neatly. Just then he and Dan heard loud yelling. Around the house, the other children dashed. Charlotte was in the lead. Me heap big Indian, she shouted. She had made her pigtails into an Indian braid. She had smeared red clay on her face. Me heap big Indian, she kept shouting. Me heap big cowboy, Willie said. He got his noose ready and aimed at Charlotte. Don't you lasso me, she cried, and started toward the house as fast as she could go. Willie took aim and threw. The loop sailed through the air, and it just missed Charlotte's flying heels. She didn't stop. She rushed into the house and banged the door. Willie roared with laughter. So did Mac and Charlie. Lucky thing you didn't catch her, Willie, said Dan. Charlotte would pull you around worse than any bucking bronco. Charlotte opened the door a little and stuck her head out. Willie picked up his rope. Willie Rogers, you put that rope away, Charlotte said. Come on out, Charlotte. I was only fooling. You're too hard to catch anyway.